So now it's over to you. We've had some very interesting presentations. You've heard how to deal with the media. You've heard direct from the media. You've heard the latest research. What questions do you have? Jo Wills in the front row, and then
I'm Jo Wills, Director General of the European Food Information Council. My question for you is about how can we better talk about positive benefits. So Monique, the professional journalist, said, let's not do a story about eating 5 a day helps prevent cancer, because we sort of already know this, unless it's whizzy, etc. And we've got important public health messages that we want to get out there, but journalists don't find them sexy enough to talk about. And it's not going to be enough to change people's behaviours, which is the fundamental thing of what we're trying to do, change people's eating behaviours. And, Ed, you said talk and keep at it. But, we've been at this for I don't know how long. What else can be done when you've got a positive benefit other than continuously talking about it? How can we get behavioural change?
If we just take the second question as well. Thank you.
Clémence Robin from the European margarine industry. The first session, this morning was a lot about trust. And when I read here comments from journalists in your presentation, Monique, on that, they said they're irritated when they call and the person says, can you please send me an email? Then I would ask how to build trust and how to bridge the gap between, I'm from industry, so between industry and journalists, because industry feel that they are being trapped when talking to journalists. Sorry for speaking like this, but it's a bit the feeling that they have is, oh my God, how is it going to be used? And journalists feel that when they receive news from industry about the food benefits, for example, like you rightly say, that they're less inclined to believe them. And it's a bit different from us, or how to bridge the gap there.
Thanks. I think those questions are probably more for Caroline and Rebecca to kick off. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm in quite a good position as the editor of Foodnavigator, which is a completely an industry publication. So, we target people in the food industry. So when it comes to people in the industry talking to me, I hope that they understand that, I'm kind of on your side as well. I try to be, unbiased as any journalist, but at the same time I can understand where industry is coming from, perhaps a little bit more than mainstream journalists. But and then on the benefits of foods as well, I think again it's one of those things where for my readers, people in the food industry, they are interested in the benefits of food. So maybe that's one way into the media, is actually to talk to the specialist publications first.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of issues of trust, I think probably everybody, it's not just the food industry, I'm sure everybody has the same feeling of nerves about I know if I've been interviewed by the media, even though I'm a journalist, you get that feeling, how is it going to be used? Am I going to be quoted out of context? Some of the things, I think, build relationships with journalists. Edward was saying talk, and I think if you do talk to the specialist journalists, you build relationships with them, you talk to them, then you will develop a feeling of trust. And also I think you can be brave and ask them, what are they going to do with it? Who else are you talking to? What's the context? What's the angle? I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to ask a journalist. And in terms of how do you get behavioural change, that's a huge question. many been asking about behavioural change for such a long time. I think lifestyle journalists, to stick up for lifestyle journalists, I think that is an important, and for a lot of people that is a place that they go to. And I know there are this whole issues around news values and newsworthiness, and if it's not negative, it's not going to have the right news values, it's not necessarily going to make the front page. But perhaps there are other ways you can get your message out, and maybe you will get a more considered or a more rounded view if you get into a lifestyle, or you might get a longer piece if you're not in a kind of very soundbitey environment. So.
Yeah, I was going to say on the how to communicate good news, unless you've got some research that shows a massive impact from following whatever the guidelines is, it's going to extend your life by 5 years or something, then it's probably not going to get coverage. And the short answer is probably don't use mainstream media. That's when your social media comes in, that's when your other outlets come in. But mainstream media, I generally say to scientists, if you're trying to communicate about your work, the media is not a good place to do it, generally. However, you ignore it at your peril.
And do we have any questions from anyone else? I have to say, actually, that the quote you picked out was actually from me, because I was one of the people that was interviewed. And I mean, I would just say that off the record is not a bad way to start. So when you talk to a journalist, you can quite easily, if they want to talk to you rather than just have a ping pong of emails, you can just say, look, we're going to speak off the record, and give them all the background, and then just give them some final quotes at the end and be clear exactly what they're going to use and be quoted on. And I think most journalists are very happy to talk off the record, and you just need to be clear.
So I'm Susan Fiak from the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, and of course we communicated dioxin and EHEC, and we also made an evaluation, and I thought it's worth noting that people in Germany thought that the risk from dioxin was equally high as the risk from EHEC, although EHEC was a real crisis in consumer protection with more than 50 dead people, and dioxin was, as you said, not a real crisis. So I think this makes a communicator think, and maybe you have some approaches how to deal with this situation, how to be able to improve this. And the second one is working in an official authority. Does it then make sense to talk to bloggers, or is it better if they are anyway influenced by the mass media? Is it then better for me also in terms of resources, only talk to the mass media or to the media?
Monique, would you like to start on that last point? Is anything in the FoodRisC research throw light on that?
I'm not sure. If we'd have to look to some other data to sort of know, where people or which things are being sort of fed through. I think there are some bloggers that are very influential and recognised as that, and so that's not a quick answer, and it's even a blurry area as well, because I think and some journalists also function in different roles, and will talk about different things because what you're allowed to do in one piece or another is different. So I think there are some that it's probably worthwhile speaking to, and I think it's back to this thing about building relationships and understanding who would be the good people to know and speak to, and that you could hopefully work with in some cases.
Do you have any comments?
I was just going to say that with regard to the mass media or social first on that, in almost the same thing, it's not one or the other, it's the person that you want to speak to, because on any given story it might be there's one particular journalist who has been following this for ages and knows in and out, and will be able to walk into their editor and say, look, I've got the scoop on this, I've got the latest info, I can do this, I can do a really big segment. Whereas even at the same outlet, if you were to go to a colleague, they might not have been able to do the same thing. And in social media, there are certain people who, if you were to be trying to do a story on the US presidential campaign, and you've gone to Nate Silver, and got him involved, then you're going to get a lot more coverage. With the communicating dioxin and how you cope with that, when it's not an actual scary story, it's a scare story. The thing that people were saying before about dark pages and things, I don't know about the terminology, but the issue is if you've got that information in advance and you've prepared for it and you've thought about what are the types of issues and have those kind of stock ready, at least something you can get out. And if you don't at least know the people who are going to respond straight away and let them have the authority to be able to pick up the phone and ring a journalist straight away or answer a call from a journalist straight away. If you don't have that flexibility and that rapid response, then you'll be in trouble.
Well, I completely agree with this idea of having something ready in advance. I mean, we talked about the pink slime incident earlier, and I reported on that story. And I had somebody who talked to me after maybe about 2 weeks. I felt so sorry for these guys, it's like they're all losing their jobs, and it's just there's no food safety scandal, and it was just the fact that one of them actually said to me, we just hoped that it would go away if we didn't talk about it. It's just such a shame that they buried their heads in the sand right from the start.
We hope it would go away if we didn't talk about it. I think there's quite a lot, obviously, to be learned from that. Do I have a final question from anybody? I do apologise. I just looked round. It is quite a wide room, so I apologise if I've missed anyone or if you're sitting behind a pillar. I think it's just this lady. Oh, sorry. 2, one here and one there, if we could do that quickly. Thank you.
Mary Brennan, Newcastle University. Edward, I was really interested in your point about it's the interested, the sort of silent majority that are often or sometimes could be referred to. What advice that should be focused on and that are going to actually engage with what you're doing? What is your advice, though, to deal with the sensitives, who may be the ones that both the scientists and industry and other policymakers and academics get really het up about, because they're the ones that can create the headlines or can give the sensational or sensitive quotes? So how do you balance the fact that we know that they're a small part of the population with also dealing with what they say?
And we'll just take Laura's question as well, please.
Laura Smiley from EFSA. We're saying that good news doesn't travel, but what sometimes when there's actually a real public health issue? I'm thinking about foodborne diseases, things like Campylobacter, most prevalent foodborne disease across the EU, and where there's a real need for awareness raising, and yet there's very little uptake on issues like this, which are genuinely causing potential human health issues. What's being done in terms of what's the responsibility of the media and on these kind of issues?
So, Rebecca, perhaps you'd like to start off on that one, perhaps drawing on your many years' experience on the food programme.
Yeah, well, actually, I heard yesterday that the FSA, there was an interesting item on the Today programme, which is a big news programme on Radio 4, yesterday morning before I came over here. And they had a big long piece on Campylobacter and a new campaign that they're doing to raise awareness of that. And I think there are things that you as a body can do yourself. I mean, that's one of the good things about social media, is that, as we've said, people are producers of media as well as consumers of media. And so, lots of organisations have their own presence, so you can be the media yourself, and I think the FSA has done some interesting work in that area in terms of raising messages or having campaigns themselves that then can get following or can get some coverage. In terms of dealing with the sensitives, particularly sensitive people, I think don't underestimate the audience. I mean, I think sometimes you have to realise that people aren't the people that you're broadcasting to can spot the balance in an argument, and they're not necessarily going to be swayed, particularly by people who are by extremist minority views, even though they're represented. So I think people do have they have a sense, they're sensible to that as an audience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that most journalists want to be getting quotes from the shouty campaigner. Or from the person who's obviously got a big bugbear about it. They want to be hearing from the right experts. So the more experts you can put out there and the less this void can be able to be created, the more expertise that gets to the journalist, the better it will be. But also, again, this preparation by informing the journalists, the key people, whoever they are, journalists, bloggers, or whatever, the ones who have influence, about the ongoing situation and the limitations of the work or the hazards or what still needs to be tested and found out about. That's key to do. But if anyone is ever drawn into an argument or is in an interview, what key thing is not to be drawn into a big shouty argument, just to repeat what the facts are, almost take a leaf out of the politicians' books and say, this is what we can say, this is what we can't say, and stick to that. Because, as been said, the audience at home, can take a very objective view of it, and they can actually pay attention. But if it's someone who is really, really key, a sensitive who is a big, important voice, then, there's the Mark Linus type of person who is someone, if they're that key, get them into the organisation, show them all the research, show them what you're doing, explain why you're doing it, and you never know. If it's someone who's tractable, maybe they'll see why the evidence says what you're doing. But if it's someone who's just an out and out zealot and it's ideological, there's no chance.
Well, I just want to say God bless the science media centre. You guys are great. But no, I think it's really frustrating how often it is that you've got one of these sort of sensitive voices, I suppose, coming out and being shouty about an issue, and how the scientists quite often will take a step back and go, well, someone else will deal with this. If you're a scientist, I'd encourage you, don't wait for somebody else to fill the void, because if you're the one with the knowledge, then you should be stepping forward.
I would also say, just in terms of getting your message across and about sort of health messages, I mean, I think while it's the responsibility of the media to broadcast some of that, I think also it's the responsibility of you guys and of the regulatory authorities to get your messages out there and make sure that you're targeting the right sort of media, and going maybe to specialists, and making sure that they have the right, that the kind of programme that they do, the kind of issues that they've covered, you're aware of what sort of programme they're putting out, and then you can target the right people and make sure, make relationships with those people and see if you can get a message across to them.
Yeah, just one final thing I just thought. We've been talking about how the media responding to these stories with the processed red meat and so on, what's driving them. We've got to remember as well that a lot of these stories are coming from press releases written by scientific journals or scientific institutions that want to get their name out into the media and know that if they put something sexy about it causing harm or it being good for you and so on, it's going to get coverage. And so we've got to remember that there's that responsibility from the scientific community as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where it becomes really complex, and that people are doing things for different reasons. And as you say, the journals want to be read and to be heard about. And as a scientist, you could get caught up in that. As an industry, you could, yeah.
So I think I don't want to stand between you and your coffee. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, too complicated for me to really sum up. But I think this take-home message is, to focus on the specialists and to try and really get your message across. And I would imagine that the Food Standards Agency would have worked really hard behind the scenes to get that interview on the Today programme. And, that a lot of work, you just hear these interviews, but I would imagine a lot of work went into that. Thank you. Coffee.